After a fairly lean 2014, video game developers are happily letting players the world over get as hyped as possible for this year's releases. There's a return for a number of beloved franchises across the next-gen platforms, and developers worldwide are promising to push boundaries as their new titles utilize all of the technology and toys available to them. But you know what they say about getting your hopes up. Not every game released this year is going to live up to its potential, and indeed some are destined to crash and burn spectacularly as elements of their makeup face the rigors of public play and industry critique. This time last year the world was convinced that Watch Dogs and Destiny were the future of gaming, but 12 months later the hope is only that developers have learned from the mistakes therein. With the adverts now starting to appear everywhere and the pre-orders for the biggest titles being taken, expectation is through the roof for what's coming to consoles. No matter how well they test, no matter how much time they invest and no matter how much money they spend, some studios are setting themselves up for a fall. Maybe something's full of bugs, maybe it's a terrible story, or maybe it invokes the ire of the media. A game might even invent an entirely new way to make its creators wish they'd never bothered. However they manage it, here are the games that have all the right ingredients to. Number 8. Batman Arkham Knight. Ever since its first unveiling in 2013, Sony have been wheeling out the Order 1886 as their most graphic example of the PlayStation 4's potential power. It looked breathtaking, and the parts of the story they slowly teased came with a potent cocktail of monsters and knights and some alternative reality steampunk London. But after over a year of expectation, the hype surrounding the game has slowly given way to reviews and demos that conclude that it isn't actually much fun to play. Despite developers ready at dawn creating what might be the PS4's greatest visual accomplishment so far, the gameplay mechanics still rely heavily on sequences of forced play and quick-time events, which a lot of reviewers have found severely off-putting to the overall experience. Movement and aiming are apparently all over the place and the camera work, so critical for immersion in third-person shooters, is unwieldily and awkward. With such a distinctive look and story, the Order has the potential to become a major franchise in the next generation of consoles, however sacrificing level design and game mechanics in favor of making it.
Number 7. The Order 1886.
Few titles have earned a warm place in the heart of gamers quite like Abes Oddysee, the 1997 PlayStation release that arguably marked the peak of the 2D platformer and preceded the genre's decline on mainstream devices. Since then it's been romanticized and revived, but its forthcoming reboot for the Xbox One is probably just one jump too far for everyone's favorite Mudokan slave. Dubbed a ground-up remake of the original game, which is different from a remastering in the same way your school Christmas panto was different to Disney's version of Snow White, New and Tasty has been a collaboration of developers Just Add Water and Oddworld inhabitants who own the rights. Appearing on PlayStation 4 last year, it's now scheduled for an Xbox One and Wii launch in 2015 despite the fact that there can't possibly still be a market for it. If, and it's a big if, players love Abe so much they would be willing to part with just south of £20 for this, then surely they either already did that last year, downloaded the original for £4 from the PlayStation Store, or still have a copy and an old PS1 in the loft somewhere. Few things would sadden the gaming world quite like a Oddworld flop, but after investing some $5 million in this Number 6. Oddworld, New and Tasty. Few titles have earned a warm place in the heart of gamers quite like Abes Oddysee, the 1997 PlayStation release that arguably marked the peak of the 2D platformer and preceded the genre's decline on mainstream devices. Since then it's been romanticized and revived, but its forthcoming reboot for the Xbox One is probably just one jump too far for everyone's favorite Mudokan slave. Dubbed a ground-up remake of the original game, which is different from a remastering in the same way your school Christmas panto was different to Disney's version of Snow White, New and Tasty has been a collaboration of developers Just Add Water and Oddworld inhabitants who own the rights. Appearing on PlayStation 4 last year, it's now scheduled for an Xbox One and Wii launch in 2015 despite the fact that there can't possibly still be a market for it. If, and it's a big if, Players love Abes so much they would be willing to part with just south of £20 for this. Then surely they either already did that last year, downloaded the original for £4 from the PlayStation Store, or still have a copy and an old PS1 in the loft somewhere. Few things would sadden the gaming world quite like a Oddworld flop, but after investing some $5 million in this Number 5. Rise of the Tomb Raider. The surprising success of 2013's Tomb Raiders creates a big problem for its forthcoming sequel, as there's almost no way the developers can follow it up. Packaged as an origin story, Tomb Raider was heralded as an exciting, engaging, and beautifully presented action-adventure that portrayed Lara Croft as a young and vulnerable individual, killing and scavenging out of necessity for her own survival. It owed much of its success to her being a much more grown-up character, despite her being considerably younger. However, this novelty will have worn off when Rise of the Tomb Raider arrives later this year and, bearing a drastic diversion from the original games, may just be retreading old boards. There's also the commercial issue. Despite shifting 6.5 million units and finishing as the sixth best-selling game of the 2013, Square Enix revealed that it was well short of the figures they'd expected, the 3.4 million first-month sales only amounting to about half of what they'd actually hoped for. 2015's Rise of the Tomb Raider won't even have the luxury of a cross-platform release, with Microsoft taking the title as an Xbox One exclusive. Whilst this isn't necessarily a bad move, the Xbox One's low sales compared to the PS. Number 4. Battlefield Hardline. After scratching out a solid place for itself in the online landscape as a plucky underdog for the Call of Duty series, Battlefield 4 was completely hamstrung by a string of catastrophic technical issues, developers DICE even going so far as to completely cease work on all other projects to tackle the problems. Naturally, the developers have promised that the next installment will be perfect. Which is where Battlefield Hardline comes in. 2015's outing will see the franchise take a radical departure from the normal soldiers vs soldiers formula of the franchise and instead focus heavily on the Los Angeles Police Department and their war on crime. Early reviews and beta testing speak of a slick game that brings a new angle to a genre preciously short on them, but, given the current climate in America, there can be few topics as potentially disastrous as a militarist arm of the law deploying lethal force on members of the public. The game's initial release date of fall 2014 was put back to this year for developmental reasons, but away from the studio the game was facing awkward questions about the way it appeared to glamorize police officers who kill civilians in the wake of the Ferguson riots. Whilst they clearly set out to make a next-gen version of the cops and robbers game children have played in schoolyards for decades, the political landscape has shifted dramatically beneath them and the game will be a huge disaster for them. Number 3. Splatoon. Coming to the Wii U in May, Splatoon is a family-friendly quasi-shooter where the player controls characters that can change from humans to squids and use paint to control territory. Hey, Nintendo fans, you wanted original IP, and talk on their end has even been of it reaching the sort of cult status that Star Fox and Mario Kart have enjoyed. The gameplay certainly looks fantastic, early reviews have been largely positive, and with the console currently enjoying a surge in sales its timing couldn't be better. Despite all that though, there's still the major question of who exactly is going to play it. Splatoon has the look and the tone, something that's aimed at 8-year-olds and under and lacks credibility as a viable alternative to the other third-person shooters on the market. Even if it didn't, the Wii U is not the sort of console that really big fans of shooters will own already, and banking on this title being enough to inspire a purchase is short-sighted at best. As with most modern shooters, it's also planning to lean heavily on the online multiplayer element of the game, however the Wii U's community isn't exactly densely populated at present. There's time for this to grow of course, and Splatoon looks like being one of the funnest games of 2015. Number 2. Hatred. You might not have heard about it yet, but when it's released later in the year, Hatred is likely to become the most talked about video game in a generation. Set in the intensely bleak world of a suicidal serial killer as he undertakes his genocidal mission on the general public, the game sets a new precedent in gore, violence, and immorality. The glorification of killing innocent people in video games rears its head as a topic of mainstream discussion on the release of every Grand Theft Auto game, but there's at least always been the defense that most of the murdering wasn't integral to the plot. But where GTA has got a begrudging pass from parents and politicians for keeping the death light-hearted and fairly tame, hatred will have players dismembering hundreds of pedestrians and police officers in the most graphic and senseless ways imaginable. Either the huge interest the game attracts from journalists and commentators will spur it onto a huge barrage of sales from players curious to see what all the fuss is about, or the suppliers will be pressured into removing it from their stores and sites entirely. Hatred has the potential to be one of the biggest disasters a small studio can face, whether it's in terms of sales, PR. Number 1. Call of Duty Black Ops 3. While Activision haven't yet seen fit to confirm anything about a 2015 Call of Duty release, their track record of releasing at least one installment every single year since 2003 suggests that another outing is as close to a sure thing as you are likely to get. Whisper it quietly though, but since 2011 sales of the series have been on a steady but profound decline, reports at the end of 2014 even indicating they might be down by as much as a third year-on-year. Add to this the further problem of a far more competitive marketplace in 2015, and the depth of the problem becomes apparent. With Battlefield ridden with bugs, Destiny choking on its own hype, and Titanfall offering nothing in the way of backstory or single-player mode, even by Call of Duty's standards, Advanced Warfare's sales hugely benefited from a lack of other decent shooters. Battlefield's developers have vowed to set a new standard in FPS when Hardline is released in March, the long-anticipated return for the Halo series when Guardians is released near Christmas, as well as Star Wars Battlefront that will surely be a huge commercial tie-in with the new film. Add that to a roster that also includes the groundbreaking time travel shooter Quantum Break, and a dystopian Tom Clancy epic in The Division, and it's hard to see a new Call of Duty being anything other than a commercial failure. Which other mega-hyped games will probably disappoint gamers in 2015?